Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. Now we are on episode 3 of the John Adams miniseries, Don't Tread on Me. This is the episode that won the Emmys for sound mixing and sound editing, and just from the battle scenes alone, I can see why. Excellent there, even though we don't see a lot of it. Compared to other grandiose miniseries, it's enough to get the point across. This episode takes place from 1777 to 1781, following the Declaration of Independence, and it shows John being commissioned by the Congress to cross the sea and join Benjamin Franklin and France in their attempt to negotiate the treaty. Now, he gets there and he takes John Quincy along with him, and things are going slower than John would like. As we saw in the previous episode when they were debating independence, he does not like things going at a slow pace. Although, when doing diplomacy with France, even though they are also at war with the British at this point, you gotta be slow, which we get some good dialogue from Benjamin Franklin here. Like his whole describing what a good diplomat does. Observes much, acts little, and speaks softly. And that's what he is doing himself. He's really getting in with the upper echelons in order to get the audience with the king, wanting to make sure he doesn't compromise the alliance. Whereas it's all too slow for John. He says some stuff that could compromise it, which is why he's eventually recalled as his assistant with Franklin, and he's sent for other things. Of course, first he goes and talks with the Dutch to try to get money, but is unofficial. But this has to be when one of his many ailments pops up, which this is one of the first times in the show it's brought up, but I actually had to look this up. But apparently in real life, John Adams did suffer from bouts of illness that popped up every now and again. There's so many of them. This time period was one of them. And it's one of those mysteries of history that we don't know for certain what it could be. It could be a combination of stress, could be allergies, could be other things. I'd say it's probably stress and probably some ailment that we don't know about. Could be a genetic ailment that only he had. Could be something he contracted that just popped up again every now and then that stress aggravated. But at the end of the episode, with how he gets sick in real life, at that point he was comatose for 5 days, so whatever it is, it was bad. And of course, that one was probably made worse by the fact they did bloodletting, which, if you want to know how bad bloodletting is, it's the thing that killed George Washington later on. And while John and Benjamin are doing their whole thing with France, and then of course with the Dutch, the War of Independence keeps going on. We hear about some of the battles. When it cuts back across the pond, we do see a little bit of it. We see some of the French, Disdain, and some of the others talking. There's a scene where they have Abigail and they're talking with her. And in that scene, Laura Linney does some good acting as well. Her best acting performance in the whole episode is in the opening scene, where she's really mad that John has to leave again. Mentions they've been married 15 years, they've been apart for many of those years due to work. And it's a very believable scene, because this is how you would expect a spouse would react. You're like, you just came home from Philadelphia and they're sending you again. And then, of course, when she does relent a little bit after John talks about it, it's for the future. She's like, you're taking Quincy with you. All right. Very believable. Just from that alone, you could see why she won the Emmy. In addition to the bloodletting, we do get to see an amputation scene in the battle scene, which it's very raw, very visceral. That was the word I was trying to think of to put in the notes, but I couldn't think of it last night when I was doing these notes. Very visceral, and to see him put the little piece of leather in, and he's like, "Rrr, rrr." It's like watching it, it's like, ooh, that's good, that's raw. But it also made me like rub my leg a little bit, and it's like hard to believe that even into the Civil War, when you got a certain type of wound in an area, that's what they would do. Because even if they tried to treat it, there'd be gangrene, and you have to lose it anyway, so better to lose it right then and there, and don't have to worry about blood poisoning and any other medical ailments and maladies. This is the first episode where we see big passages of time as an episode progresses. In the first episode, it was a decent one, like a couple months. Second one, also a little bit longer, about a year at most. You could tell the passage of time by the lighting outside, subtle changes in clothing and all that. Here, it's a couple years, and it kind of jumps forward, and it takes a moment to guess just how far in advance. If you're not fully familiar with the dates of the Revolutionary War, it might be a little tricky, but if you do know the big ones, like if you know when Yorktown was, you're like, okay, that's how far in advance they jump. And it does help that at the beginning it does say what year it is, so you know, okay, that's where we're at the timeline. Then it jumps forward and you're like, oh, there. So I went all the way to Yorktown. So it's a passage of a couple years, 4. And we get to see all the work, and of course there's work that's happening off screen, which some of that stuff they have to mention in dialogue, so there is some obvious exposition there, but in a mini-series where we're going to have to cover a long stretch of time, it's bound to happen. And of course, like in the previous episode, Benjamin Franklin does have some of the best bits of line there. Like I mentioned his observe much one, but here's another one. Accomplish much while appearing to accomplish little. That's a good one right there. And then of course his whole thing to Adams about how to learn French. Attend the theater or take a mistress. That is such a Benjamin Franklin line right there. Fun thing is that John ended up being in Europe for about 10 years, all things total. It's not exact, but almost. I think it's closer to 8 if my whole thing is. It said 10 on IMDb, so that's what I put in the notes, but the other thing looks more about 8 because of a little plot element we're going to see in the next episode develop. Now, some of the side cast, I'm probably going to butcher this first name. It's Damien, sorry for the pronunciation here, Jorielrelt. Excuse me, I don't know how to pronounce French correctly, but he's the French actor who plays King Louis. I believe if I'm reading this correctly, it's King Louis XVI. Very youthful face in there, does a pretty good job, believable switching between French and English. Of course, which ties into another little thing about him is a lot of the French characters do mock John Adams, but I say it's a combination of how he is very, very aggressive in his politics, but also the fact he doesn't speak French. So he has to rely on translators to translate what he's saying for those who are not bilingual. But also it's probably one of those things like, why did the Americans send someone who doesn't speak French? But I guess that could also tie back into another thing that Franklin says in this episode, and that is that the French just see every American as rustic, so I play the part. So that could be the other thing. He looks rustic, but he can speak French, but then John Adams, he dresses a little bit more, but from the fact he can't speak French, you could tell he's a bit more rustic. Because he just refuses it. And of course, in certain regards, that's one thing that still hasn't changed. There are a lot of modern Americans that don't want to learn multiple languages. It is what it is. Then we got John Dossett playing Benjamin Russ, another historical figure. He was in Jag and Man on the Ledge. He does a decent job for the times he's there. Judith Magret as Madame Heleventis, who is Benjamin Franklin's lover in this episode, and a little bit we see her in the next one. She also does a pretty good job. She was in Ella the Lovers, among others. She is involved in one of the best little comedic moments in the episode. It's not a full-blown one, it's just one of those ones just looking at it and you're like, ah. Take a mistress indeed. Yes, Mr. Adams? All in all, this is a pretty decent episode. Nice to see how this miniseries is going to handle jumping across a long stretch of time, more so compared to the previous two. Does a good job of detailing what it is, because obviously some of the stuff John did not witness firsthand, so he's not going to have a firsthand knowledge of it. The only complaint is, like the previous episode and the next one, no mention of the Articles of Confederation even in passing. They do mention the Constitution, but it's one of those things like you'd think they would mention it, or at least some of the implications of it. I mean, especially in the next episode, a little moment between John and Thomas Jefferson, there would have been a nice moment to include it, but alas, it's not there. Where would I put it if I'm going to rank it amongst the others? It's probably towards the bottom as a whole. I mean, there are moments in there I do really love, and I do like it shows the political intrigue involving bringing France into the war as an ally, and of course getting money, because by the end, you know, as they say, credit established, or I believe that's actually the beginning of the next episode, but it ties in here because you can't get money from the Dutch in the previous one, but a big battle at Yorktown, boom, you guys are getting your credit. If there's any complaints, maybe they could have had another couple scenes in there talking about some more of the political intrigue, but maybe the writers and the director didn't want to drag some of those points on too long and just have the big beats, and then have you know just from the implication of the time jump being, oh, they're still working on that. Like, no, so that's what John's been doing all this time. I know there's more to it than him trying to do some of the stuff involving money and all that, but that's more for looking at the history books and books written specifically about him rather than the show. Especially since the show has to cover the entire length of time and a running time of about 8 hours at max, I believe, if you account for just a little bit of overrun past an hour and the fact that the second episode is 90 minutes. And of course, the next episode, we're also going to get some of this jumping in time again. And that, of course, is the episode where we're going to see what John started to do after the revolution, but before the Constitution was ratified.